I am Arthur Walker, and I am 34 years old. After 30 years of being the invisible, discarded scapegoat of my own flesh and blood, the ultimate betrayal finally happened on what was supposed to be a unifying Thanksgiving weekend. My own parents and my older brother deliberately and secretly canceled my hotel room just to pay the overdue lease on his luxury sports car. While I stood completely stranded in the opulent, crowded lobby of a five-star oceanfront resort, my brother laughed directly in my face. He announced to the entire room that he only booked accommodations for his definition of the real family. My parents physically turned their backs, pretending not to know me, while dozens of wealthy guests watched my public humiliation unfold. But there was one massive, life-altering secret they did not know. 6 months prior, my grandfather had quietly brought in his lawyer to restructure his entire estate, secretly making me the sole manager of the massive family trust fund and our commercial real estate portfolio. They thought they were throwing me out on the street to suffer. They had absolutely no idea they were actually signing their own financial death warrants. Before I tell you exactly how I systematically dismantled their fake lives, hit that like button if you believe in absolute, unapologetic justice. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now let us go back to the exact moment the illusion shattered. The sound of shattering ceramic echoed through the grand lobby of the Breakers Hotel. It is a sound that will be permanently burned into my memory. The heavy ceramic coffee mug slipped right through my fingers. My hands had gone completely numb. I watched the dark roast coffee splash violently across the pristine, polished white marble floor. The dark stain spread rapidly, ruining the immaculate perfection of the entrance. The front desk clerk, a young woman with a brass name tag reading Emily, looked at me with an expression of genuine pity mixed with rising panic. Her voice was incredibly soft, trained for the high-end hospitality industry, but in the quiet elegance of that massive room, her words felt like a physical blow to my chest. She leaned forward slightly and said she was terribly sorry, but she absolutely could not find any reservation under the name Arthur Walker. She tapped her keyboard frantically, the clicking sound echoing the rapid beating of my heart. She told me she saw the premium bookings for my parents, George and Margaret Walker. She saw the ultra-luxury ocean view suite booked for my brother Julian, his wife Sarah, and their young daughter Chloe. But the system showed absolutely nothing for me. My profile was entirely blank. I stood there frozen in my tailored navy suit. It was a suit I bought with my own hard-earned salary after recently securing a massive promotion as a pharmaceutical research director. I was a man of science, a man who relied on hard data and facts. My brain immediately tried to process this information logically. It made zero logical sense. We had planned this massive family Thanksgiving trip for over 6 months. I had specifically paid for my own first-class flight to Florida because I wanted to be completely independent. But I was aggressively assured by my mother that all the rooms were completely handled by the family account. Then came the sound that always signaled disaster in my life. The sharp, arrogant, rhythmic click of imported Italian leather shoes approaching from directly behind me. My brother Julian walked up to the mahogany reception counter. He was 37 years old, but dressed like a teenager trying to impress a crowd of strangers on the internet. He was draped in head-to-toe designer labels, wearing a gold watch that cost more than a small house in the suburbs. He smelled strongly of an overpowering, expensive cologne. His voice was intentionally loud, perfectly calculated to bounce off the vaulted, hand-painted ceilings and draw the attention of every single affluent guest checking in around us. He looked at the spilled coffee soaking into the marble, then looked me up and down and smiled. It was a smile so entirely devoid of warmth that it chilled the humid Florida air around us. He waved his hand dismissively at the clerk and told her not to worry about the mess. The maid staff could handle it. He then turned his gaze directly to me. His eyes were wide with fake innocence, but his voice was laced with pure venom. He loudly declared to everyone within earshot that there was no mistake in the system. He said he simply only made reservations for our real family. He listed them off deliberately. A massive suite for him, his beautiful wife, and his brilliant daughter, and a premium room for our loving parents, He crossed his arms over his chest, tilted his head back, and played the role of the exhausted, highly successful older brother dealing with a deadbeat sibling. He smirked and suggested I grab my suitcase and find a cheap roadside motel down the highway if I could even afford the nightly rate. Through the massive, ornate, gold-framed mirrors lining the lobby walls, I caught sight of my parents, George and Margaret Walker. They were standing near a towering, extravagant floral arrangement in the center of the lobby. My mother reached up and obsessively adjusted her expensive silk scarf. My father pulled out his smartphone and started scrolling intensely, his face inches from the screen. They were actively, deliberately turning their backs. They were acting completely oblivious to the scene Julian was causing. They were intentionally throwing me to the wolves, just as they always had since I was a little boy. A heavy, suffocating, intensely uncomfortable silence fell over the massive reception area. Other wealthy guests completely stopped walking. Bellhops paused with their brass luggage carts. The valet drivers standing near the glass doors turned their heads. Everyone was staring. Everyone was waiting for me to break down. They expected a scene. They expected anger, red-faced shouting, or the pathetic, desperate pleading of a man who had just been publicly disowned by his own blood. Julian desperately wanted a show. He wanted me to completely lose my temper so he could play the victim, the long-suffering golden child dealing with his unstable, emotional younger brother. I looked at Julian's incredibly smug face. I looked at the clear reflection of my parents aggressively ignoring my existence in the mirror. Then I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second and took a slow, deep, lungex-expanding breath. The burning anger that had lived in the center of my chest for 3 decades suddenly evaporated. It was completely replaced by a crystalline, freezing, terrifying clarity. I looked the young clerk directly in the eyes, ignoring Julian entirely, as if he were nothing more than a ghost. I thanked her politely for her time and her professionalism. I told her I would be leaving the premises immediately. My voice did not shake even a fraction of a millimeter. My expression remained entirely neutral, like a stone wall. I reached down, firmly, grabbed the handle of my briefcase, turned on my heel, and walked straight toward the revolving glass doors. I did not look back at Julian's face. I did not glance at my parents. The only sound was the steady, confident rhythm of my own footsteps against the marble floor, leaving them all standing in the deeply awkward silence of an unfulfilled confrontation as the heavy automatic doors spun me out into the warm, salty Florida air. I did not feel an ounce of despair. I stopped on the valet curb, pulled my smartphone from my jacket pocket, and opened a highly secured encrypted email application. I stared at the digital document sitting right at the top of my inbox. It was the master ledger of the Walker Family Trust Fund. Every single dime my parents and my brother spent came from this one single source. And my name was the only one on the legal authorization line. The trap was set. Justice was not just a distant concept anymore. It was an impending, unstoppable avalanche. To truly understand the absolute insanity of that moment in the hotel lobby, you have to understand the toxic dynamic that governed the Walker household for my entire life. For as long as my memory reaches back, Julian was treated as the ultimate investment, and I was treated as the discarded insurance policy. If Julian was the brilliant sun around which my parents eagerly orbited, I was the cold, dark, empty space, completely ignored in the background. The blatant inequality started extremely early. When it came time for college, the defining moment of a young man's future, my parents sat me down at our granite kitchen table. The weather outside was cold and raining, perfectly matching the atmosphere inside. They looked me dead in the eye and explained that the college fund they had supposedly been saving for 18 years was entirely depleted. They did not apologize. They stated it as a matter of fact. They told me Julian urgently needed the massive sum of money to attend a highly prestigious private business university because he was clearly destined for corporate greatness. They looked at me, a straight-A student, and told me I was tough, smart, and resilient enough to figure it out on my own. They actually tried to frame their total financial abandonment as a compliment to my character. I ended up working 80 brutal hours a week. I juggled agonizing night shifts at a greasy local diner, scrubbing floors, and taking orders from drunk college kids while working dawn shifts at a campus biology laboratory cleaning beak. I did all of this just to keep the electricity turned on in my cramped, freezing off-campus apartment and to pay my exorbitant tuition bills on time. I eventually graduated with top academic honors, carrying zero debt and possessing a deep, unbreakable understanding of what it truly meant to survive completely on my own 2 feet. The day I finally graduated, my parents did not even bother to attend my ceremony. They claimed they had a scheduling conflict. In reality, they were busy throwing a lavish, catered outdoor party for Julian because he had just managed to land an entry-level marketing job through a family connection. Their grand graduation gift to him was a brand-new, custom-ordered Porsche. I clearly remember riding my rusted, squeaky bicycle past his massive driveway that afternoon. I watched my father proudly polish the gleaming hood of that expensive sports car, while Julian aggressively posed for pictures in his designer sunglasses. The crushing injustice of my family was not a quiet, subtle thing. It was loud, bright, incredibly obnoxious, and parked right on the driveway for the whole neighborhood to see. Julian's entire extravagant existence was funded by our grandfather, Theodore Walker. Grandfather Theodore was a ruthless, self-made industrialist. He was a man of iron will, strict moral principles, and a massive fortune built in manufacturing. He deeply believed in the value of hard labor. However, as his physical health began to sharply decline, he entrusted the daily, complex management of his vast wealth to a longtime family accountant named David. My parents and Julian immediately treated David like their own personal, limitless ATM machine. They lived in unapologetic luxury, constantly hiding behind the carefully curated illusion of extreme success. My father decided to retire early, spending his days drinking expensive scotch on exclusive golf courses. My mother spent her long afternoons complaining bitterly at local HOA meetings and constantly redecorating our sprawling childhood home with imported furniture. Julian built an entire fake personality on social media. He branded himself as a brilliant, self-made entrepreneur and venture capitalist. In reality, his lavish lifestyle, his vacations, his clothes, and his cars were entirely subsidized by a staggering $30,000 monthly allowance pulled directly from the family trust fund. The massive turning point in my life happened exactly 2 years ago. I was visiting my grandfather in his dark, wood-paneled study. He was slowly recovering from a minor stroke, and his eyesight was failing him rapidly. He asked me purely out of desperation to help him organize some highly confusing tax documents. Because of my extensive background in rigorous pharmaceutical research, my brain is naturally wired to quickly analyze massive sets of complex data, find hidden anomalies, and track variable changes. I sat at his mahogany desk with a stack of ledgers. It only took me 3 focused hours to realize the numbers did completely not align. David, the highly trusted family accountant, was systematically bleeding the trust fund dry. He was inflating basic administrative expenses, creating incredibly complex ghost invoices for services that never existed, and funneling massive amounts of untraceable cash directly into Julian's private accounts to secretly fund his increasingly reckless, out-of-control lifestyle. Julian was bleeding cash at an alarming rate just to maintain his fake Instagram image, and David was his willing enabler, taking a very hefty, illegal cut for his continued silence. I printed the undeniable proof and presented the raw data to my grandfather. I did not use emotion. I did not raise my voice. I simply laid out the detailed spreadsheets, highlighted the massive financial discrepancies in bright yellow ink, and let the cold, hard numbers speak for themselves. Grandfather Theodore sat silently in his worn leather chair for a very long time, staring blankly out the window at his massive estate. The deep disappointment in his aging eyes was infinitely heavier than any explosive anger could ever be. He finally realized the family legacy he had spent his entire life building was completely rotting from the inside out. The very next morning, David was quietly and ruthlessly fired. The very real threat of a massive life-limiting lawsuit kept him entirely silent and permanently out of our lives. But what happened next changed the trajectory of my entire existence forever. Grandfather Theodore immediately called his most trusted corporate lawyer. Over the course of 3 weeks, he completely and legally restructured the entire trust fund. He ruthlessly removed my parents and Julian from any position of influence, oversight, or future control. He completely rewrote his will regarding the inheritance. Instead of dividing the empire, he handed the keys to the kingdom directly to me. He legally made me the sole executive and the only active authorized manager of the trust fund. He looked me in the eye and told me that true brilliance dwells only in those who can stand firmly on their own 2 feet. He fully recognized that the brutal crucible of my childhood, the years of painful neglect and bone-crushing hard labor, had ultimately forged the only person in the family capable of handling real massive power without being instantly corrupted by it. We kept this a total absolute secret. The monthly allowance checks continued to flow seamlessly to my parents and Julian. Grandfather Theodore wanted to perform one final test. He wanted to see if they would ever change their toxic behavior, if they would ever show genuine love or take financial responsibility. He gave them enough rope, silently waiting to see what they would do with it. For 2 entire years, I quietly watched the bank statements roll across my desk. I watched Julian lease even more expensive cars, buy ridiculously overpriced watches, and post endless photos of his supposedly perfect, wealthy life. I watched my parents sink hundreds of thousands of dollars into a non-refundable deposit for an ultra-luxury retirement community. They constantly looked down on me because I chose to drive a reliable used sedan and lived in a highly practical, modest apartment in downtown Chicago. They openly mocked my demanding career, laughing and calling me a low-paid lab rat. They had absolutely no idea that the lab rat they despised was the exact man personally approving the transfer of their financial lifeblood. Every single month, I secretly held their entire world, their homes, their cars, and their status in the palm of my hand. I was patiently waiting for the inevitable day they would finally push me too far, and that day arrived the week before Thanksgiving. The week before our scheduled Thanksgiving trip, the massive cracks in Julian's perfectly curated facade finally began to splinter wide open. I was sitting at my desk in my Chicago office, deeply focused on reviewing highly complex clinical trial data, when my personal cell phone began vibrating aggressively against the wood. The caller ID flashed on the screen. It was Sarah, Julian's wife. Sarah and I were never close. From the moment she married into the family, she was entirely bought into Julian's toxic lifestyle. She frequently joined my parents in making sharp, passive-aggressive comments about my off-the-rack wardrobe or my complete lack of a high society social life. So when I answered the phone and instantly heard her hyperventilating on the other end of the line, I immediately knew something catastrophic had happened in their perfect world. Sarah was sobbing completely uncontrollably through her panicked, heavy gasps for air. The ugly truth spilled out in a messy, pathetic flood of words. The $30,000 monthly allowance from the trust fund was suddenly no longer enough to cover Julian's rapidly expanding vanity. To maintain his wealthy image, he had secretly opened over a dozen high-limit credit cards and completely maxed every single one of them out. He had taken out massive high-interest personal loans to fund terrible high-risk business investments, desperately trying to prove to his internet followers that he was a real successful businessman. The massive mortgage on their sprawling showpiece mansion was now 3 full months past due. But the immediate terrifying crisis, the exact thing that finally broke Sarah's sanity, was the car. The lease on Julian's beloved custom-ordered Porsche was in total default. The luxury dealership had officially sent a final, legally binding notice of repossession. If he did not come up with exactly $15,000 in cash by the end of the week, a heavy-duty tow truck was going to pull directly into their upscale suburban driveway and violently drag the car away in front of all their wealthy, judgmental neighbors. For a man like Julian, losing his ultimate status symbol publicly was a fate infinitely worse than death itself. Sarah openly begged me for money. She cried and pleaded. She knew I had a good salary from my recent promotion and aggressively asked me for a massive personal loan. She swore up and down that Julian would pay me back the moment his next business deal closed. She then escalated her tactics. She threatened that if the crushing financial stress continued for one more week, she was going to immediately file for a highly publicized divorce and seek full absolute custody of their 7-year-old daughter, Chloe. I sat quietly in my office chair and listened to her cry. I felt a very sharp pang of genuine sympathy for my young niece, Chloe, who was entirely innocent in this mess, but I felt absolutely zero sympathy for Sarah or Julian. I kept my voice in a calm, flat, completely unemotional tone. I told her clearly that all of my personal finances were currently tied up in long-term real estate and highly illiquid investments. I told her I could not and would not help them out of a hole they dug themselves. She instantly stopped crying. Her voice turned vicious. She cursed at me, calling me a deeply selfish, heartless brother, and then violently slammed the phone down, ending the call. I knew Julian was getting extremely desperate, but I still severely underestimated the absolute depths of my family's moral depravity until exactly 3 days later. I was at my parents' house in the suburbs. I had stopped by to help my technically illiterate father set up a new laptop computer before our upcoming flight to Florida. My father had carelessly left his iPad completely unlocked, sitting face up on the granite kitchen island. I am absolutely not the type of person to snoop through other people's devices, but a bright banner notification suddenly popped up on the large screen that instantly caught my eye. It was an urgent text message from Julian. The message read, "Did you handle the hotel situation yet? I need that cash transfer today to stop the repo guys from taking the car." My blood instantly ran freezing cold. Without thinking, I reached out and tapped the screen, opening the entire conversation thread between my father, my mother, and Julian. The messages laid out a conspiracy so incredibly vicious and calculated that it literally took the breath out of my lungs. Julian had fully confessed his total financial ruin to our parents. Instead of acting like responsible adults and holding him accountable for his actions, my parents immediately went into full panic mode to fiercely protect the golden child's fragile ego. They spent hours brainstorming ways to quickly find the $15,000 in cash. It was my mother, the very woman who brought me into this world, who suggested the ultimate betrayal. I read her exact typed words on the screen. "Arthur doesn't really need to stay at the luxury resort with us. We will just cancel his premium suite and secretly take the full refund. It's almost $10,000 back to the card. We can pull the rest from our personal checking account to save the car. Arthur makes a good salary now. He can easily afford to get his own cheap room somewhere else. He is used to roughing it anyway." My father immediately replied, "Good idea, Margaret. Do not tell him anything until we actually get there. If we tell him now, he might refuse to get on the plane, and your father wants us all together for the holiday photos. We will just play dumb and tell the front desk there was a massive booking error in their system." I stood frozen in the middle of my parents' perfectly decorated kitchen, staring blankly at the glowing screen of the iPad. My hands gripped the hard edge of the marble island so tightly that my knuckles turned completely white and ached with pain. For years, I had foolishly held on to a tiny, pathetic shred of hope. I hoped that underneath all the blatant favoritism, underneath all the snide remarks, my parents still harbored some basic fundamental level of human love for me. Reading that text thread killed that pathetic hope instantly and forever. They were fully willing to strand their own son in another state during a major family holiday. They were willing to steal the money specifically allocated for my accommodation. They were willing to publicly humiliate me in front of strangers, all just to protect Julian's fake, crumbling public image. I did not scream. I did not confront them. I carefully, deliberately set the iPad down exactly where I found it, making sure the screen was off. I walked out of the house without saying a single word to my mother, who was watching television in the next room. I got into my car and drove away in total, suffocating silence. The deep sadness I used to feel was completely gone. The agonizing hurt was gone. What remained in my chest was a cold, highly calculated determination. They wanted to play a brutal game of survival. They wanted to constantly see who could handle the harsh, unforgiving realities of the real world. I decided right then and there to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to let them spring their pathetic little trap at the hotel, and then I was going to turn around and burn their entire fake kingdom to the absolute ground. The long flight to Florida was absolutely suffocating. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, even though I was the only one who knew the war had already begun. My parents and Julian sat comfortably in first class, sipping expensive champagne and laughing loudly, their premium seats entirely funded by the trust's generous travel allowance. I sat far back in economy class, wedged into a middle seat, having proudly paid for my own ticket. I spent the entire 3-hour flight staring blankly out the small window at the thick white clouds, mentally going over the complex legal documents saved securely on my encrypted laptop. Inside my carry-on bag, safely tucked away between my clothes, was a small, beautifully wrapped velvet box. It contained a delicate, highly expensive pearl hair clip I had carefully purchased for my young niece, Chloe. Every single Thanksgiving, it was my quiet tradition to bring her a meaningful, lasting gift. I bought this specific piece of jewelry as a symbol for the strong, independent, capable woman I deeply hoped she would eventually become. Far away from the toxic, superficial vanity of her parents, touching the soft velvet of the box was the only thing that kept me mentally grounded during the flight. Chloe was the only genuinely innocent person caught in this impending wreckage, and thinking of her gave me the strength to endure the next few hours. When we finally arrived at the massive resort, the warm, humid ocean breeze did absolutely nothing to thaw the solid ice running through my veins. The Breakers is a stunning masterpiece of Gilded Age architecture, dripping with old money, massive crystal chandeliers, and unyielding high society standards. My family aggressively marched through the grand, towering entrance like returning royalty. They confidently handed their expensive leather bags to the rushing porters without even bothering to make basic eye contact or say thank you. I intentionally hung back near the grand entrance, purposely letting them approach the mahogany front desk first. I needed a brief moment to ensure all the final pieces of my plan were perfectly in place. Before walking over to join my family, I casually caught the eye of the hotel's general manager, a distinguished, sharply dressed older man named Marcus. I had met Marcus several times over the past 6 months in highly confidential closed-door meetings regarding the trust's massive commercial real estate investments. Marcus knew exactly who I was. He knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was the powerful man who completely controlled the massive corporate accounts that frequently booked their most expensive exclusive corporate retreats. Marcus instantly saw me standing apart from my loud family. He immediately started walking over to me, a bright, welcoming smile on his face, clearly ready to offer me a complimentary upgrade to their finest presidential suite. I looked him dead in the eye and gave him a very subtle, incredibly sharp shake of my head. I held up my right hand just an inch, signaling him to stop his approach. I looked at him intently, then pointed my eyes directly toward Julian and my parents, who were loudly complaining at the front desk. Marcus was a seasoned hospitality professional who had dealt with intense, wealthy family dramas for decades. He instantly read the tension in the room. He nodded slightly, understanding the silent command, and gracefully stepped back into the shadows near the busy concierge desk. He respectfully allowed the tragic scene to fully play out, exactly as my family intended. I finally walked slowly up to the polished counter, just as Julian was finishing his grand theatrical performance. I stood there perfectly still, listening to the deeply apologetic young clerk tell me my reservation simply did not exist in their system. I listened to my older brother loudly declare his absolute supremacy and my utter worthlessness. I watched my parents intensely inspect the floral arrangements, actively and maliciously erasing me from their reality. They looked at me and thought I was standing completely helpless in the eye of a massive hurricane, totally exposed and broken. They truly thought my silence was the pathetic silence of a defeated man, painfully accepting his lowly place in the family hierarchy. They had absolutely no idea that the eerie calm they were witnessing was the deliberate, hyper-focused silence of a man holding the detonator to their entire lives. I quietly absorbed their cruelty one final time, permanently cementing their absolute guilt in my mind when I finally turned around and walked out through those heavy revolving glass doors, leaving my spilled coffee on the marble floor, and my family actively basking in their shallow, pathetic victory. My heart rate was perfectly steady. The trap had been successfully sprung. The evidence of their betrayal was irrefutable. I stepped out into the bright, blinding Florida sun, pulled out my smartphone, and prepared to make the phone call that would violently end my family's financial existence forever. I thought the worst of the drama was over. I was so incredibly wrong. The blinding, unforgiving Florida sun hit my face the exact second I pushed my way through the massive, heavy, revolving glass doors of the Breakers Hotel. The afternoon heat was incredibly thick and utterly oppressive, carrying the heavy, distinct scent of ocean saltwater, expensive imported sunscreen, and the exhaust of high-end sports cars idling at the valet stand. But for the very first time in my entire 34 years of existence on this earth, I actually felt like I could finally truly breathe. The suffocating weight that had been pressing down on my chest since childhood was suddenly gone. I stood alone near the bustling valet curb, watching a seamless, endless line of imported luxury vehicles. Gleaming silver Lamborghinis, custom black Rolls-Royces, and cherry-red Ferraris pulling up to the pristine brick-paved entrance. I was completely alone. I was officially stranded thousands of miles away from my quiet, safe apartment in Chicago. I had been completely and maliciously stripped of my living accommodations for a major, highly anticipated holiday weekend by my own flesh and blood. And yet, looking down at my hands, I realized they were not shaking even a fraction of a millimeter. My heart was not racing with the familiar crippling anxiety or the deep, dark fear of abandonment that used to plague my teenage years. Instead, a profound, chilling, and incredibly powerful sense of absolute peace washed over my entire body. From the top of my head down to the soles of my leather dress shoes, I had just witnessed the absolute, terrifying limits of my family's moral depravity. They had boldly and shamelessly shown me exactly who they were, without any polite masks, without any societal filters, and without any pretense of familial love. They had made their ultimate, irreversible choice. They chose a leased sports car over their own son and brother. I took a few deliberate, slow steps away from the chaotic, bustling main entrance, seeking a quiet, isolated spot under the deep shade of a row of perfectly manicured, towering palm trees. The massive green fronds swayed gently in the warm ocean breeze, casting dancing shadows over the pristine concrete walkway. I reached into the inner breast pocket of my tailored navy suit jacket and pulled out my smartphone. The high-definition screen was glaring brightly in the intense afternoon sunlight, forcing me to squint as I bypassed my normal everyday contacts and personal applications. Instead, I directly opened a highly specialized military-grade encrypted secure portal application. This specific software had been quietly and securely installed on my device exactly 6 months ago by my grandfather's most trusted corporate attorney during a highly confidential closed-door meeting in Connecticut. The application did not open easily. It strictly required a complex, randomly generated 12-digit alphanumeric password, followed immediately by a high-resolution facial recognition scan, and finally a secondary biometric fingerprint verification on the back of the device. This was not just a standard banking app. This was the master absolute control panel for the entire staggering Walker family fortune. I stared intensely at the digital dashboard illuminating my screen. Even after 6 months of managing it, the sheer scale of the wealth still occasionally took my breath away. I could clearly see the massive multi-million-dollar numbers representing our extensive commercial real estate holdings spread across 3 different states, the highly diversified, aggressively managed stock portfolios, the incredibly deep liquid cash reserves sitting in offshore accounts, and the meticulously structured generation-skipping inheritance trusts. And right there, Nestled quietly in the primary administrative tab were the three active, high-priority disbursement accounts linked directly to my parents, George and Margaret Walker, and my older brother, Julian Walker. These were the exact, specific accounts that automatically and silently fed their lavish, ridiculously extravagant lifestyles on the first day of every single month without fail. These were the accounts that paid for the custom-tailored imported designer suits Julian wore specifically to humiliate me in public. These were the accounts that funded the luxury vehicles my parents drove to their exclusive restricted access country club. These accounts were the artificial life support system keeping their completely fake, heavily curated public images alive. I did not press the freeze button immediately. I am a man of science, a man of strict protocol and undeniable procedure. I needed to follow the exact preordained plan I had established with the only man in the entire world I truly respected and loved. I opened my dialer and typed in Grandfather Theodore's private, highly unlisted landline number. He was currently back in his sprawling historic estate in the quiet woods of Connecticut, likely sitting in his favorite worn leather chair by the massive stone fireplace, holding his phone, waiting specifically for this exact phone call. He answered on the second sharp ring. His voice was raspy, permanently weakened by his recent terrifying medical struggles and his advancing age. But his brilliant mind remained as sharp, calculating, and absolutely unforgiving as a freshly sharpened steel blade. He did not bother saying hello. He did not ask how my flight was. He simply asked one question, his voice echoing in the quiet receiver. "Did they do it, Arthur? Did they take the bait?" I stood perfectly still in the dark shade of the palm tree, casually watching a valet driver carefully parallel park a massive, entirely blacked-out SUV. I kept my voice incredibly level, completely devoid of any emotional fluctuation or lingering sadness. They did exactly what we logically predicted they would do, Grandfather. It was like watching a perfectly scripted play unfold. They secretly canceled my room reservation behind my back, specifically to steal the thousands of dollars in refund money. Julian intentionally tried to mentally destroy and humiliate me in front of the entire crowded lobby. He loudly, proudly declared to a room full of wealthy strangers that I was not a part of his real family. Mom and Dad physically turned their backs on me. They literally stared at a large flower arrangement so they wouldn't have to look their own son in the eye while he was being publicly downed. It was textbook behavior. They played their designated parts perfectly. There was a long, incredibly heavy silence on the other end of the secure line. Through the earpiece, I could faintly hear the slow, rhythmic, metallic ticking of the antique grandfather clock that stood in the corner of his dark mahogany study. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried the massive, crushing, agonizing weight of an aging patriarch who was officially permanently giving up on his own deeply flawed children. I gave them every single possible chance, Arthur. For 30 years, I funded their pathetic, empty lives. I completely turned a blind eye to their endless vanity. I paid their massive debts. I waited patiently, year after agonizing year, for them to naturally show a single solitary ounce of genuine humility, a single shred of true familial loyalty, or a moment of authentic love for anyone other than themselves. But I was foolish. A rotting, diseased branch cannot be miraculously saved by watering the tree. It must be violently, cleanly cut off to save the rest of the healthy trunk from dying. I gripped my phone so tightly my knuckles turned pale white. The time has finally come, Grandfather. We need to execute the final contingency plan. They crossed the absolute, undeniable final line today. There is no going back from this. "Do it," Grandfather Theodore commanded. His voice suddenly infused with a cold, terrifying, unyielding authority that sent a shiver down my spine despite the Florida heat. "Lock them out. Every single account, every single credit line remotely tied to the trust. Freeze the monthly travel allowances, the housing subsidies, the discretionary spending funds, the emergency reserves. I want them completely, totally cut off from the oxygen supply. Let them finally see what the harsh, unforgiving real world feels like without my heavy wallet constantly protecting them from the consequences of their own toxic actions. You are the sole, absolute executive now, Arthur. You have my full, unconditional blessing, and you have the massive, unbreakable backing of the law on your side. Understood completely, I replied, my voice echoing his iron resolve. I will handle everything from here. Rest well, grandfather. I ended the call. I took one last incredibly deep breath of the salty ocean air, firmly grounding myself in the stark reality of the historical moment. Then I looked back down at the glowing screen of my phone. I carefully navigated through the complex security menus to the primary disbursement control panel. I selected Julian's massive expense account first. A bright yellow prompt immediately appeared on the screen, legally warning me that actively suspending this specific account would instantly globally decline all linked debit cards, premium credit cards, and automated wire transfers. I did not hesitate for a single millisecond. I firmly tapped Confirm. The small circular status icon on the screen instantly changed from a bright, active, glowing green to a dead, solid, unblinking red. Next, I scrolled down and selected my parents' massive joint account, the specific account that was currently funding their supposed luxury, worry-free retirement and their incredibly expensive, entirely unnecessary daily shopping habits. The prompt appeared again. I tapped Confirm. The icon turned red. In a matter of 30 brief seconds, standing completely quietly in the dark shade outside a world-class luxury resort, I effectively, legally, and permanently wiped out their entire financial existence. I did not need to yell. I did not need to throw a massive, embarrassing public tantrum in a hotel lobby. I simply used the undeniable, crushing power of financial leverage and airtight legal authority. I was the silent, invisible architect of their absolute destruction. While I was standing out there enjoying the gentle breeze, I could perfectly vividly picture exactly what was happening inside that opulent, air-conditioned lobby. At that very moment, Julian was likely standing at the polished mahogany counter, aggressively and arrogantly handing over his heavy metal black card to cover the massive incidental deposit required for his luxury oceanfront suite. He was probably making arrogant, loud small talk with the polite clerk, loudly bragging about his completely non-existent corporate business deals, desperately trying to impress his wife Sarah and every single wealthy stranger standing within earshot. My parents were probably standing nearby, loudly discussing where they were going to eat their ridiculously overpriced $200 per person Thanksgiving dinner. They were completely, utterly blinded by their own toxic, suffocating arrogance. They had absolutely no idea that the massive, invisible financial safety net they had happily bounced on for their entire privileged lives had just been violently, permanently yanked away from underneath them. I knew the catastrophic fallout would be immediate. High-end, five-star hotels like the Breakers do not wait around. They run credit authorizations on the spot before they even hand over the room keys. The violent, unavoidable collision between Julian's completely fake reality and my carefully orchestrated absolute justice was only minutes, perhaps seconds away. I decided right then that I was absolutely not going to stick around to watch the pathetic circus unfold. I had absolutely zero desire to engage in a messy, screaming, emotionally draining match in a public setting. I opened a premium ride-sharing application on my phone and quickly ordered a black luxury SUV to take me straight back to the international airport. I had my own beautiful, peaceful life to live, a highly successful, demanding career to manage, and I absolutely refused to let their incoming massive panic attack ruin my long holiday weekend. But I also knew deep in my soul that I could not just silently disappear into the wind without explicitly delivering the final crushing educational blow. They desperately needed to fully understand exactly who pulled the trigger on their execution. They needed to clearly know that the quiet, discarded son they casually threw away like worthless garbage was the exact man holding the heavy golden crown. As my black SUV smoothly pulled up to the valet curb, I opened my text messaging application and carefully crafted a new group message. I added Julian, my mother, and my father to the recipient list. I typed out a single, devastatingly clear sentence, but I did not hit send immediately. I wanted to time the delivery perfectly. I wanted the text message to arrive and vibrate in their pockets at the exact humiliating moment their credit cards started aggressively declining at the front desk. I climbed into the quiet, heavily air-conditioned back seat of the car, calmly told the driver to head to the airport, leaned back against the headrest, and waited for the glorious show to begin. The massive black SUV glided smoothly and silently down the long, majestic palm tree-lined driveway, leaving the sprawling estate of the breakers far behind me in the rearview mirror. I sat completely relaxed in the spacious back seat, staring intensely at my phone screen, watching the digital numbers on the clock tick by. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 11 minutes. Having traveled extensively for medical research conferences, I knew exactly down to the minute how long the standard check-in process took at a luxury resort of that specific caliber. They would check the ID, confirm the reservation, offer a welcome drink, and then the moment of truth, swiping the card for incidentals. Suddenly, right at the 12-minute and 30-second mark, my phone screen erupted, lighting up the dim interior of the car like a Christmas tree. The incoming call screen flashed violently, vibrating intensely against my palm. The caller ID boldly displayed the name Julian. I did not answer. I simply sat there watching the red and green buttons glow and let it ring until it went to voicemail. It stopped for exactly 2 seconds and then immediately started ringing again. This time, the caller ID showed my father's number. I actively silenced the phone, keeping my eyes glued to the screen as the missed call notifications began to stack up rapidly in a frantic, desperate cascade. 3 missed calls, 5 missed calls, 10, 15, followed by a sudden, rapid-fire barrage of completely panicked text messages. "Arthur, call me back right now. Did you do something to the bank accounts? Nothing is working. Arthur, the hotel is threatening to call security. Answer the phone." They were hitting the massive, impenetrable brick wall of reality at full speed. Sitting in the quiet car, I could vividly, perfectly imagine the deeply humiliating scene unfolding in that grand lobby. The polite, highly trained but ultimately firm hotel clerk slowly sliding Julian his heavy black card back across the mahogany counter, quietly and professionally explaining that the high-value transaction was unfortunately declined by the issuing bank. Julian, instantly turning bright, beet red with deep embarrassment, furiously slamming his fist on the counter, demanding they run the machine again, loudly and arrogantly claiming there must be a massive stupid error with their pathetic, outdated computer system. Then my father, trying to save face and confidently stepping up with his own gleaming platinum card, attempting to play the role of the wealthy patriarch saving the day, only to be met with the exact same humiliating, publicly embarrassing result. The horrifying realization slowly, agonizingly dawning on all of them that they were standing in the middle of one of the most ridiculously expensive hotels in the entire country with absolutely zero valid form of payment to their names. And this realization hitting them right after they had maliciously, intentionally canceled the only guaranteed financial safety net they had, my fully paid room. I looked at the clock. 15 minutes had passed. I decided the marinating process was complete. It was time. I did not want to simply reply to their text messages. A text message was far too impersonal, too easily misinterpreted for a moment of this massive, life-altering magnitude. When the phone lit up for the 20th time, I finally pressed the green button and answered the call. It was coming from my father's cell phone. As soon as the cellular connection was fully established, a chaotic, high-pitched, completely terrified chorus of panicked voices violently erupted through the small speaker of my phone. I could clearly hear Julian aggressively yelling at someone in the background, loudly demanding to know what the hell was going on. I could hear my mother practically hyperventilating, desperately asking my father if their identities had been stolen by international hackers. "Arthur, oh my God, thank God you finally picked up." My father's voice was completely, totally stripped of its usual arrogant, dismissive, condescending tone. It was entirely replaced by raw, unfiltered, naked panic. "Arthur, where are you right now? Something is incredibly, horribly wrong with the bank accounts. The hotel is aggressively declining all of our cards. Every single one of them. They won't even let us keep our luggage in the lobby without a valid credit authorization on file. You need to call Grandfather right now. His stupid accountant must have made a massive catastrophic error with the wire transfers. We are totally stranded here, Arthur. Do something." I remained perfectly, terrifyingly silent for 5 full, agonizing seconds. I let the absolute dead air hang between us. I let them actively drown in their own desperate, suffocating anxiety. When I finally chose to speak, my voice was as cold, hard, and unyielding as a solid block of concrete. "Put me on speakerphone," I commanded, my tone leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. "What, Arthur? Are you crazy? This is absolutely not the time for your weird power games. Just call your grandfather," I said. I interrupted, dropping my voice an octave. "Put me on speakerphone right now. I want Julian, and I want Mother, and I want Sarah to hear every single solitary word I am about to say to you." There was a brief, frantic rustling sound, the noise of a phone fumbling in sweaty hands, followed by the distinct, hollow echo of a speaker connection being activated in a large room. "You're on speaker," my father said, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Everyone is listening. What is going on, Arthur?" I leaned back against the cool leather seat of the moving car, staring out the window at the passing palm trees. "There is no bank error, Dad. The accounts haven't been hacked by anyone. The wire transfers didn't fail. Your premium cards are declining at the front desk because I manually personally froze every single one of them. Exactly 5 minutes ago while I was standing in the parking lot. Total, absolute, graveyard dead silence violently fell over the phone line. For a brief, terrifying moment, I genuinely thought the cellular connection had dropped. Then, Julian's voice pierced through the silence, incredibly high-pitched, aggressively defensive, and laced with absolute denial. "What the hell are you talking about, Arthur? You can't freeze the family trust accounts. You don't have the legal authorization to do that. You're just a low-level pharmaceutical researcher. Stop lying. Stop playing these sick jokes and help us fix this right now before I lose my mind." Exactly 6 months ago, I began speaking slowly, letting my words drop like heavy, crushing anvils onto their fragile reality. Grandfather Theodore officially, legally restructured his entire multi-million-dollar estate. He discovered through undeniable data that I personally provided him that David, the former family accountant you all love so much, was illegally, fraudulently funneling massive amounts of trust money to fund your pathetic, entirely fake lifestyle, Julian. Grandfather fired him immediately, threatened him with federal prison, completely rewrote the inheritance documents, and legally removed all of you from the trust entirely. He legally transferred complete, unilateral, absolute control of the entire family fortune, the massive commercial real estate portfolios, and every single monthly disbursement account directly to me. I am the sole executive. I am the manager. I am the man who has been quietly, silently approving your lavish, ridiculous monthly allowances for the past half year, waiting patiently to see if you would ever show a single shred of basic human decency toward me. I heard a sharp, painful, gasping intake of breath from my mother. "Arthur, no. Oh my God, no. That can't possibly be true. Your grandfather would never, ever do that to his own children. He wouldn't leave us with nothing." "He did exactly that," I replied coldly, feeling absolutely zero sympathy. "And today, in that lobby, you proved to him exactly why he made that brilliant choice. You were perfectly happily willing to strand your own son, your own blood brother, in a hotel lobby in another state without a room just so you could secretly steal my refund money to pay off the overdue lease on Julian's ridiculously overpriced, completely unnecessary sports car. You desperately wanted to protect his fake internet image at the direct expense of my basic human dignity. You looked me right in the eye, Julian, in front of a dozen people, and told me I wasn't part of the real family. "Arthur, please listen to me," Julian stammered, his voice totally breaking. The arrogant, tough guy facade completely shattering into a million tiny, irreparable pieces. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The repo guys are coming to the house tomorrow. I'm going to literally lose the car. Sarah is threatening to divorce me and take Chloe." "I understand it perfectly, Julian," I cut him off sharply, raising my voice just enough to assert absolute, unquestionable dominance over the conversation. "I understand that you have lived your entire 37 years on this earth as a highly destructive parasite, feeding constantly off a family that worshipped the ground you walked on while treating me like actual garbage. The $30,000 a month is gone. The luxury travel allowance is gone. The housing subsidies are gone. You are completely on your own." "Arthur, you can't possibly do this to us. We are your parents." My mother was openly, hysterically sobbing now. "You are our son. You have to help us." "You really should have thought about the consequences of your actions before you treated your own son like disposable collateral damage," I said, feeling absolutely profoundly no remorse whatsoever. "As of this exact moment, all financial support from the Walker Family Trust is permanently terminated. You actively wanted me to go find a cheap, dirty motel down the highway because you claimed I was used to roughing it. Well, I strongly suggest you take your own brilliant advice. Go find a cheap motel. Figure out how to pay for your own economy flights back home. Welcome to the unforgiving real world." Before they could scream another desperate word, before they could offer another fake, hollow apology, I aggressively hit the red button and ended the call. I immediately went directly into my phone settings and systematically blocked all of their numbers. Julian, mother, father, Sarah, all of them permanently blocked. 2 rapidly passing months flew by since the explosive, life-altering confrontation in Florida. Without the endless phone calls demanding favors or the passive-aggressive insults disguised as jokes, my professional career skyrocketed at a pace that even surprised me. Eleanor, the incredibly brilliant, notoriously no-nonsense CEO of our massive company, was thoroughly and genuinely impressed. She fired Dr. Evans on the spot for gross academic dishonesty and officially, formally offered me his highly coveted position. I was officially promoted to the prestigious role of head of global research. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away, the fake, carefully constructed, heavily filtered world of my brother Julian was violently, spectacularly collapsing into absolute, undeniable ruin. Without the massive, completely unearned $30,000 monthly cash injection from the trust fund, Julian's fragile house of cards disintegrated in a matter of a few short weeks. The repo men aggressively hooked up the gleaming, custom-ordered, obscenely expensive Porsche right in front of all his wealthy, highly judgmental neighbors. Sarah officially filed for a highly contested, vicious divorce just before the Christmas holidays. My parents did not fare any better in the harsh light of reality. They were violently forced to abruptly list and sell our sprawling, heavily decorated childhood home just to cover the exorbitant legal fees and to barely pay off their own rapidly mounting, high-interest credit card debts. They desperately tried to reach out to me multiple times. I explicitly and forcefully instructed the lawyer to categorically deny every single financial request and rigorously reiterate the absolute unyielding terms of the financial freeze. A few days later, a highly secured, heavily insured registered package arrived directly at my corporate office, shipped directly from the estate in Connecticut. Nestled inside, resting on a bed of silk, was an incredibly rare, perfectly maintained vintage Rolex watch. Underneath the heavy watch was a thick, cream-colored envelope made of expensive, heavy cardstock. Arthur, awakening to the harsh, brutal truth of life, sometimes brings intense, agonizing pain. But it is a profoundly, undeniably necessary pain. Your difficult, unwavering decision gave them an incredibly important, long overdue lesson that I failed to teach them. Wear this watch every day as a constant reminder. True brilliance, true lasting power, and true unshakable peace dwell only in those rare individuals who have the immense courage to stand firmly on their own feet. You have successfully secured our real, enduring legacy. I am deeply, profoundly proud of you. I gently folded the thick paper, slid it carefully back into the protective envelope, and placed it safely in the inner breast pocket of my suit jacket, right over my beating heart. It wasn't just a new season for the massive, sprawling city of Chicago. It was the definitive, triumphant, and absolute beginning of a completely new, unbreakable, beautiful life for me.